So thank you so much, Professor Newman, and welcome everybody. I'm a professor at the Public Health School and the Kennedy School here at Harvard, but what I really want is an appointment at this school. So it's great to chat here and thank all of you, first of all, for defying the weather and the odds to come here. There's something about this topic that brings out snow, I guess, but it's only because of the tremendous commitment of Professor Newman and his colleagues and Gabriella Follett. Where's Gabriella? Right here. Thank you so much that we're having this seminar today, which is very, very important for our family. We would like to think for law and for public health and for Harold and me personally. This is a really very exciting day for us because it's really about family in many ways. Here in Boston, my wife and I are thrilled to have 2 kids. And the fiance of one of them is here, Dr. Zuri Song. Zuri, just raise your hand. He gets a round of applause. He's a doctor at Mass General Hospital, a resident. My daughter and my son hope to be here, as well as my son's fiance.
But a graduate of Harvard Law.
Graduate of Harvard Law. But today we're really talking about how themes of family and brotherhood, if you will, all converge in this important topic on global tobacco control. And as you saw from the flyers and everything, this is our first joint lecture. So we're very, very thrilled to be here. And Professor Newman, thank you very much for making it happen. So I'm going to go first for about 20, 25 minutes. Harold will go next. I'm the older brother, so I get to go first. And then we're delighted to have Q&A from all of you about this critically important topic. So let's just start. And as I mentioned, this is very much a family affair. And these are pictures of my parents, and then particularly of my father, the late Professor Kwang Lim Ko, who was also ambassador to the United States from South Korea quite a while ago. My mom is here today. Mom, can you give us a big wave and a big round of applause for my mom? Just coming over here today, she was reminiscing about all her time in Cambridge and at Harvard and at this law school. My beloved dad got 2 degrees from the school, an LLM and an SJD, and he loved the school very much. He and I got baptized in the church, which is literally next door, Harvard Epworth Methodist Church, so we have a lot of history here. And our dad was the most visionary, courageous person that Harold and I have ever met. He immigrated to this country a generation ago searching for the American dream. He and my mom sacrificed to give us the best education we could possibly have. And as he was raising us and 4 other siblings, so 6 kids in general, they stressed the importance of education, about mission in life, about giving back. And then my dad had a saying that I think about just about every day, and he used to say, "Be broad like the sky." I love that. I love that saying. And he encouraged Harold and me and our siblings to take on broad issues in our career, whatever they may be. So probably because of his influence, Harold and I went into our various fields and then ended up serving in the Obama administration together. A complete coincidence, actually. The picture on the bottom left of the 2 of us was taken in my old office at the Health and Human Services Department in Washington, D.C. And Harold and I spent a lot of time together in D.C. Trading stories and talking about our various responsibilities as Assistant Secretary in my case and legal advisor in Harold's case. And we have many pictures and stories that we could share, but I'm just going to show you this one picture of us standing behind the president when he reinvigorated the White House Initiative on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. This is 2009. So I'm standing right next to the president there with my blue tie. Harold's there to my immediate left, which is a very proud moment for the both of us. And this was just one example of the many times that we got to appear together in public appearances in DC and talking about our various fields of medicine and law. And needless to say, we got confused for each other all the time. And so after a while, I always clarified for audiences that I'm Howard, he's Harold, I'm the doctor, he's the lawyer. I went to Yale and teach at Harvard. He went to Harvard and teaches at Yale. I worked at Health and Human Services for Secretary Kathleen Sebelius. He worked at the State Department for Secretary Hillary Clinton. And as my mother likes to point out, both her sons worked for female bosses. So I hope you enjoy this presentation from Harold and me as we both give our perspectives on this critically important public health issue of tobacco control. Now I'm going to make my presentation quite personal because I am a physician. I've trained in multiple fields. And one area that I've trained in and I'm board certified in is cancer, medical oncology. And back in my early days as a young physician, I started asking myself, as one who was committed to curing patients with cancer, what are the leading causes of cancer death in our country and what can we do about it? So here's the first slide that I've looked at so many times since I was in training several decades ago, looking at the major cancer killers in women: breast cancer, colorectal cancer, uterine cancer, pancreatic cancer. But the main one that jumps out is lung cancer, as you can see here. And just by looking at this one slide, you can notice several important trends. And these are cancer death rates from 1930 up to the present. First of all, back in the early part of the 20th century, lung cancer was an uncommon disease. It caused relatively few deaths. Over time, it rose rapidly, as you can see on this slide. In the late 1980s, it exceeded breast cancer as the leading cause of cancer death in women. And then it kept rising. The only thing that's encouraging about this curve is it's starting to go down as smoking rates are starting to go down in our country. So that is very striking, of course. And then if you look at the parallel slide in men, asking what are the top killers, cancer killers for men in the United States, again, we look at very important issues like prostate cancer, colorectal cancer, pancreatic cancer, stomach cancer. But the parallel curve for men is this dramatic curve for lung cancer. Again, perhaps the most dramatic, most encouraging part being that those death rates are starting to go down in recent decades as smoking rates are starting to go down. So very importantly, if you ask what are the top cancer killers in men and women in the United States in the 21st century, for women it's lung, for men it's lung, and most of this is preventable, of course. And then you start thinking about why so many people are suffering preventable suffering and dying preventable death due to tobacco-related disease. I know I started thinking about that as a young physician, started looking at more data about the history of tobacco in the United States and indeed around the world, wondering what we could do as a society to start reversing these trends. Became more aware of members of my extended family who had suffered and died from tobacco-related illness. And so that investigation brought me to some very basic but very striking public health facts here. So if you look at global tobacco-related deaths on the left, in the 20th century, 100 million deaths due to tobacco dependence, 70% of them in high-income developed countries. For the 21st century, it's projected to be 1 billion deaths. That's 1 billion deaths, with 70% of those deaths projected to be in low and middle-income countries. Now, we're in a time in our country, and indeed as part of the global community, where we ask ourselves, what are the major public health threats and what can we do about it? And when you just look at slides like this, you have to conclude that tobacco is our leading cause of preventable death, not only in this country, but worldwide. In the US, we have about 500,000 deaths a year. And most of these deaths are preventable. And yes, we can do something about this. This is a global talk. So if you look at slides like this from the Cancer Atlas, you will see that there are some 1 billion smokers worldwide. Oops, I'm sorry. About 5.8 trillion cigarettes sold each year. The areas in dark brown are the areas of the world with the highest per capita consumption. And you can see places like China and Eastern Europe and Russia have the highest per capita cigarette consumption rates. There are more smokers in China than there are people in the United States, for example. So this is a global public health challenge that we all must be aware of and try to address literally every day if we care about trying to make the world healthier. And this slide can be a little misleading. So for example, in India, that looks like a country with relatively low per capita consumption. But as some of you may know, they have a huge problem with oral tobacco there, not combustible or smoked tobacco. And so oral cancer is a huge problem in India. And so country by country, region by region, there are very disturbing themes and sub-themes that need to be addressed. Now, this picture on the left is about 40 years old, but was on the cover of Medical World News, very strikingly showing that this is a form of dependence, that tobacco use is a form of dependence and addiction. And of course, you start wondering why this has ever been allowed to happen in our society with so much preventable suffering and so much preventable death. And on the right, you just see just some of the many, many examples of advertising from the tobacco industry over the years. Here's the subtitle at the top, I choose. Well, if you're a young teen or a child, you may initially choose to start using this substance. But after a while, inevitably, you get dependent or addicted. And then, of course, there's discussions about choosing to use this become secondary to overriding concerns about how to stop. Lots of advertising suggesting the allure of tobacco that you all have heard about, of course. Lots of documentation from medical scientists about the health impacts of tobacco, its impact on cancer, causing about 1 in 5 cancer deaths globally. For every US death from tobacco, 30 people have chronic tobacco-related illness, such as heart and lung disease. And very critically, the average age of initiation in the United States is 11 to 13 years of age. So as former FDA Commissioner Dr. David Kessler once said, nicotine addiction begins when most tobacco users are teenagers. So let's call this what it really is, a pediatric disease. And he said that so aptly about 15, 20 years ago when he was FDA Commissioner. I should also mention that secondhand exposure of tobacco smoke is also causes tremendous morbidity and mortality, about 50,000 deaths in the United States, about 600,000 deaths a year worldwide. So these are issues that we need to be concerned about in terms of protecting people who are involuntarily exposed from secondhand smoke. Just to be very graphic about this, if you look at life expectancy in people who smoke versus those who do not, on average, the typical smoker loses about a decade of life or more from smoking, about 12 years for men on the left and for about 11 years for women on the right. Again, this is completely and totally preventable. And then over time, as we've made some progress in this country and other parts of the world in reducing the burden of tobacco, there are disparities where there are some groups that have a higher burden of tobacco dependence than others. So for example, you can see here that current smoking rates are higher in low-income subpopulations in this country. Right now, the average adult smoking rate is about 17% in the US, but much higher in low-income subpopulations. They're higher in those with lower educational attainment. That's that middle box there. And then over on the right, you can see some description of vulnerable population. Military populations, LGBT groups, Medicaid populations, those with behavioral health issues. And so these are key issues to focus in on if we want to really provide health equity for all in the future. So here is a critically important slide, because if you ask people who smoke in the US, do you consider yourself addicted? About 3/4 of smokers answer yes to that question. They know they're hooked. They want to stop. They are trying to quit. About 40% try to quit in any given year. If they are successful, smokers make between 8 to 11 quit attempts before being tobacco-free, just to show you how difficult this addiction is. As a physician who's cared for so many patients who smoke, and with many people in my extended family who are smokers, I am humbled by the power of this addiction. But the good news is that since 2002, the number of former smokers in this country has been greater than the number of current smokers. So quitting smoking can occur. It's not easy, but people who want to quit need encouragement, need help, need support, and need an environment where they feel empowered to become tobacco-free. So part of our efforts in public health are to reach out to former smokers because they have a lot to convey to all of us. And let me just quickly show you two 30-second ads supported by the CDC from the so-called Tips from Former Smokers campaign. So here's the first one.
When you have a hole in your neck, don't face the shower head. Keep your stomach covered when you're outside. Be very careful shaving. Get used to eating only soft foods. Clean out your speech belt twice a day. You can quit. For free help, visit cdc.gov/tips.
Here's the second one.
I'm there, and I just know there's no. I want to give you some tips about getting ready in the morning. On your bed. When you're in the night. Just how you're ready for the day.
As Assistant Secretary for Health, I had the honor of meeting a number of these former smokers who filmed these commercials on behalf of the CDC. Terry, the second woman, and Sean are both heroes. Terry subsequently passed away after filming this public service announcement. So these are very riveting testimonies, if you will, and bring a human face to the suffering. And perhaps many of you have seen these ads over the last number of years. These ads have been actually quite successful in raising quit attempts for American smokers and also for improving cessation as well. So we're very proud of those efforts. So what do we do about this if we're committed to public health and global tobacco control? We can help individuals quit. That's what those tips ads were all about. We can support smokers who want to quit if we're friends and family, or patients if we're healthcare providers. We can encourage our institutions to be involved, to provide smoke-free environments, to talk about the importance of these public health trends. We can make communities tackle these issues and embrace them because this is such a huge public health challenge. We can get federal and state partnerships. And then we can also be assured that we have global partners that we're working closely together with around the world. And so I'm just going to quickly summarize some of these, and then my brother will take over and talk about other very, very important attempts. One very important development in 2009 was when the Family Smoking Prevention Tobacco Control Act was signed into law, and the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, was granted authority for the first time ever to regulate tobacco manufacture, distribution, and marketing. Here's a picture from the Rose Garden of that signing ceremony by the president. This was June 22nd, 2009, a historic day for public health and tobacco control. And I will never forget this day because it was my first day of work as the Assistant Secretary for Health. That previous Friday, I was confirmed by the US Senate. So that Monday, June 22nd, I went to work, raised my right hand, got sworn in, and I said, okay, what do I do now? I'm your Assistant Secretary. They said, Dr. Koh, your first job is to go to the Rose Garden and support the president as he signs the Family Smoking Prevention and Tobacco Control Act into law. So this was a day that I will never, ever forget. We ended up putting out the first ever tobacco strategic plan from Health and Human Services over on the left called Ending the Tobacco Epidemic. And we would like to think that's made some kind of impact in this country over the last 7 years, but we have a lot more to go. In 2014, in January, we celebrated the 50th anniversary of the landmark Surgeon General's report on tobacco. Here's a little picture of the ceremony at the White House, led by Secretary Kathleen Sebelius, and I'm there with the former acting Surgeon General, Boris Lushniak. This report came out on the right, celebrating that in the 50 years since the Surgeon General's report came out, some 8 million lives were saved because of tobacco control measures. But tragically, it's estimated some 5.6 million kids are projected to die unless we accelerate those efforts going forward. In the global arena, we have the World Health Organization, WHO Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, what's called the FCTC, entered into force in 2005. So here are major themes embraced by about 180 countries around the world in terms of advertising bans and counter-advertising, clean indoor air laws and secondhand smoke bans, taxation, and product regulation. This is all based on what's called the Empower framework, and my brother will say more about that. So much of this has been driven over the last century by aggressive advertising by the tobacco industry. Figures are that in the US alone, there's over $9 billion of advertising and marketing a year led by the tobacco industry. So we have to change the social norm. When I was health commissioner of this state, we put up this billboard of Wayne McLaren, who was a former Marlboro man, a cigarette model, killed by lung cancer. So the more we have the resources to do that, send a counter-advertising message, the more we can hopefully change the norm back to a healthy norm. Graphic warning labels now exist in some 80 countries around the world. So here's one example from Canada, a big front-of-pack graphic warning, which has been shown in studies in Canada and elsewhere to be effective in improving cessation rates. In 2012, our Food and Drug Administration proposed that we would have large graphic warning labels on US cigarette packs. I was part of that announcement. It was quite a day for public health history. And here is what the proposed graphic warning labels were going to look like for US cigarettes. But this was blocked by the industry in court and has not proceeded forward since then. So some 80 countries have this now, but the US still does not. We are all very grateful to the leadership of Australia, who has pioneered something called plain packaging. And this law was passed in Australia in 2011. And the premise of this is that even if you look at a pack like that, there are parts of the profile of this pack that is attractive in terms of a consumer wanting to purchase and use the contents. So in Australia, they've banned anything that looks vaguely attractive on the pack. So if you buy a pack of cigarettes in Australia, it looks like this, with graphic warnings on the front as well. I do want to acknowledge the presence of two wonderful colleagues in tobacco control, Vaughn Rees, who's from our public health school, also is from Australia, and Alan Geller, who's a wonderful colleague of mine in tobacco control. The two may want to say more about this, but now there are efforts in the United Kingdom and in France to possibly introduce plain packaging there. Here in our country, we're trying to create a social norm where clean air is the standard. And the states in green are the states that are completely smoke-free in public places. So right now we have about 30 states that are smoke-free in all public places, workplaces, restaurants. Massachusetts is one of them, as you can see here. So we don't have a countrywide smoke-free workplace law, but it's done state by state. So that's why it's very striking to know that in Ireland, in 2004, that country became the first country in the world with all smoke-free indoor public places across the country. I'll never forget hearing about this for the first time in 2004, where I was told that there'd be no smoking in public places in all restaurants and pubs in Ireland. And pubs. And pubs. When I first heard it, I said, I can't believe that. How can you walk into a pub and not have cigarette smoke? But of course, upon reflection, that was the end result of an industry that has tried to make that the norm for years. So countries like Ireland have now reclaimed clean air as the social norm across that country. Now, 12 years later, about several dozen countries in dark green have smoke-free laws across the entire country, like Canada, a good part of Latin America, Australia, again, Western Europe. So we're watching that trend very, very carefully. Another strategy that's been very well studied and gets lots of attention globally as part of the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control is cigarette taxes. Here in the US, we have a federal tax of $1 per pack, but then each state can decide how high they want to raise their excise tax. So if you're a state in green like Massachusetts or New York, you have state cigarette taxes that exceed $3 per pack, whereas on the other extreme, in the Deep South, those areas in red, you have state excise taxes that are much, much lower. So we can talk a lot about this in the Q&A and beyond, if you will. Now, one of the challenges and frustrations for public health is between state tobacco tax revenue and revenue from the so-called Master Settlement Agreement in 1998. Every year, we have about $26 billion coming in to states that could be used for tobacco control or for public health. But if you go all the way to the right, less than 2% of that, about $500 million, is actually spent on tobacco prevention and on public health. So one of the challenges for public health advocates everywhere is that we know what to do with the Empower framework and the Framework Convention themes. We have the revenue coming in through state tobacco tax revenues and the master settlement funds, but we don't have, to date, the political will to apply those resources to really make prevention come alive. So right now, we have lots of ongoing developments with respect to tobacco control. Several months ago, Secretary Castro of Housing and Urban Development announced the intention to make all public housing in the United States smoke-free, and that is out for public comment, and my colleagues Alan Geller and Vaughn Reese and Dan Brooks have written about that and the implications for some 2 million people who are in multi-unit housing across this country. When I was the Assistant Secretary, I had the honor of starting a tobacco-free college campus initiative, and we started some 500 colleges had tobacco-free policies, and now that's up to about 1,500. In 2014, as you see on the right, CVS made huge news by deciding to stop selling tobacco in any of their pharmacies across the country and renaming themselves CVS Health. So a very dramatic commitment there. On the bottom left, I can tell you about a movement that's getting momentum where the concern was that in ballparks, especially major league ballparks, we have baseball athletes chewing tobacco, which represents a hazard to them. By the way, smokeless tobacco is prohibited in minor league baseball, but until recently had been allowed in Major League Baseball. And so if you're a young kid watching on TV and your hero is chewing smokeless tobacco, they may emulate that behavior. So San Francisco was the first city to ban smokeless tobacco in its Major League Baseball parks. Boston last year became the second. Here's a picture of our mayor, Marty Walsh, making that announcement. And standing right behind him is Boston Red Sox great Curt Schilling, who made a very powerful statement at the press conference saying that he felt terrible that any child would watch him chewing tobacco and then emulate his behavior. He is struggling with oral cancer right now, by the way, so it was a very powerful press conference that I think was very well received by the public health community here in this state and around the world. And then also efforts to raise the purchase to 21. You can tell by the clothing here that this is Hawaii. And so this is the governor, Ige, there signing the law to become the first state to raise their purchase to age 21. Now, I've talked about combustible tobacco most of the time for this brief presentation, but there's also chewing tobacco, snus, dissolvable, cigars, bidis, and of course, e-cigarettes, which are highly controversial. The Family Smoking Prevention and Tobacco Control Act gives the FDA authority to regulate cigarettes, roll your own, but not these other forms of tobacco. So we are all awaiting a effort called deeming, so the Food and Drug Administration can extend their regulatory authority over all these other forms of tobacco, especially and including e-cigarettes. So as I close, I wanted to just point out this very tantalizing study that came out in the New England Journal of Medicine last year, where a randomized trial was made to offer smokers standard strength cigarettes, 16 milligrams of nicotine per gram, and then very low nicotine cigarettes, as you can see here. Asked smokers to try these for 6 weeks. In the latter group, that were assigned to the low nicotine cigarettes smoked fewer cigarettes, had reduced nicotine exposure, double the quit rate attempts. And this is all part of a long-term strategy called the endgame for tobacco. And is it possible that the FDA, with its new regulatory authority, if they get more studies done like this with results that match these results, could require that cigarettes in this country be of low nicotine standards? It's said that people smoke for the nicotine and die from the tar. And if you can take the nicotine addiction factor out and truly make it a choice for people, that could lead to public health benefits for the future. So this is a part of an ongoing, very vigorous conversation in the public health community as we speak. So my last slide before I turn it over to my brother. Here's a wonderful statement from the World Health Organization from over half a century ago. The enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of health is one of the fundamental rights of every human being. I think about this phrase literally every day in my life as a public health professional. The highest attainable standard of health. People who are wrestling with tobacco addiction do not enjoy that highest attainable standard. We can do something about it. And the human rights dimensions of this are very, very important. And that's why, at this point, I'm very proud to introduce my brother, Harold, if I can say, one of the leading international lawyers in the world. And I'm just delighted to work with him on this issue. Thank you very, very much.
So I've been following my brother for some decades now. And as you can tell, it's not an easy business. Not that I have found it intimidating to always be speaking after my taller, smarter, handsomer, older brother. That you should not take that as the reason why we have not made a joint public appearance since the Kennedy administration, which was when we played a clarinet trio. I was in 4th grade at the time, and my brother Ed was the 3rd member. Our joint appearance before that is the one pictured here at my mother's PhD graduation. That's Howard on the left. That's my mother getting her PhD. And that's me grabbing always for the mortarboard, which led me to my career as a dean and as an academic. Now, during this period, my brother Howard was so extraordinary in everything he did. My mother said something to me very important, which she said, you know, if you're not as good at something as Howard, you could do something different. I took this to heart and decided that I would become a lawyer, since he and my other brother Ed had the medical field wrapped up. And that is what led me to what I've been doing. But what I think is important to recognize in this lecture is that the doctors and the scientists have done their job. There is no doubt, despite all of the efforts of the tobacco industry to rebut the scientific evidence is overwhelming at both the national and the global level, going back to the Surgeon General's report. The people who have yet to do their job are the lawyers, which is why we chose to give this lecture at Harvard Law School. It is time, it seems to me, for the lawyers to build on the medical evidence and treat this not just as a public health imperative, but as a human rights imperative. Now, the fact of the matter is that lawyers are very active in this area. They are the lawyers for the tobacco companies, who, as you can tell, have billions of dollars of resources and can recruit the very best law graduates in the world who are ready to work for them. And the question that we want to ask here is, if you are a human rights lawyer, if you believe that your mission as a lawyer is to promote human rights, if you hold these truths to be self-evident, that all persons have a right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, and that right to life includes a right to be free of preventable, treatable diseases, whether you as a lawyer ought to be devoting your time and energy to building on the work of scientists and building on the human rights side of the equation. So the challenge for law, it seems to me, is how to affirmatively assert human rights as a moral and legal basis for national and international tobacco control. That's a plaintiff's kind of argument. And second, how to defend the national regulation of tobacco from international law attack. And the attack is widespread, as we will see in a moment. Now, you can ask, why use a rights framework? And we could go into this in some detail in the Q&A. As I would suggest, 3 reasons. It's a catalyst, an impetus to action and public awareness. By talking about the highest attainable measure of health, we can measure the difference between the expectation that the human rights framework provides and the conduct that we actually engage in. And then as a process, lawyers believe in process. This Harvard Law School is a school of legal process. A process to promote norm internalization, individual self-participation in their own governance, and accountability. Now, the right to health has been a subject of discussion in human rights law for many years. Jerry Newman, the director of the Human Rights Institute, has been a leader on the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, served as the last US representative on the Human Rights Committee. I should say thank you, by the way, to Jerry and to Carol Newman, who is here. They tell you you don't make good friends in law school. And 2 of the best friends I've had in my life and through law have been Jerry and Carol, who have made it possible for my brother and I to appear here today at this world-famous law school and center. Now, the general comment of the Committee on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights talks about the content of a right to health. It's a lengthy general comment, but the important language here is a human right to enjoy the facilities, goods, services, and conditions necessary for the realization of the right to health, which includes freedom from both communicable disease and preventable, treatable, non-communicable disease. So it's not just about Ebola and Zika, which, while serious, and my brother will say more, have a tiny mortality rate vis-a-vis what we're talking about here. So the question is how then to describe the issue that we are presenting here as a human rights issue. Nicotine is the most addictive substance that can be obtained without prescription. It is the only legally available product, says the WHO, that kills half of its regular users. Kills half of its regular users. And the question is there some kind of right to be free of this for those who have become addicted? My question would be, is there an emerging human right to avoid preventable, non-communicable disease caused by addiction and promoted by under-regulated private production and private consumption? Now, those of you who know other things I've written, my view is that this is part of what I call transnational legal process. Effective human rights advocacy means provoking interactions that can lead to the interpretations of global norms that lead to the internalization of those norms and standards into domestic law, and that also fundamentally change social norms and human practices. So when my brother talks about counter-advocacy and changing the social norm, he's really talking about this process as extended deep into the human psyche, that when children reach a certain age, they do not become addicted as a matter of course. I learned recently, and I'll say more about this, that every day, 3,200 children who are under the age of 18 take their first smoke. Why should that be the social norm? And can't law and regulation do something to prevent it? Now, the transnational legal process thus far can be described in great detail. On the human rights side, this has been a subject of discussion at the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva. The UN Special Rapporteur on the Right to Health has engaged on this topic. My brother has attended many meetings of non-communicable disease and tobacco control, a recent one being held in Abu Dhabi in March 2015. My brother mentioned the Family Smoking Prevention and Tobacco Control Act. There is also, of course, the U.S. national litigation that led to the Master Settlement Agreement, $240 billion in state claims. But the most effective strategy that has emerged is a private-public strategy that my brother mentioned called Empower, which is now being jointly pursued by the World Health Organization with the support of the Bloomberg and Gates Foundations. Empower being monitoring tobacco use and prevention, protecting people from tobacco smoke, including secondhand smokers. So for example, my dentist was telling me recently that while he never inhaled a cigarette in his life, he was recently discovered to have a polyp on his lung. And when he looked back on it, he turned out that during medical school for 6 years, he worked in a bar where he inhaled massive amounts of tobacco smoke. And as a result of this, developed lung cancer, which fortunately he was able to address quite early. To offer help to those who want to quit, and you heard from my brother that people try to quit 8 to 11 times before they succeed, warning them about the dangers of tobacco use, enforcing bans on advertising, sponsorship, and promotion, and raising taxes, as you saw, with some of the revenues, but not all, being directed toward other kinds of remedial measures. This is a public-private strategy that can become a critical part of the transnational legal process and norm shifting. And implementation has been remarkably broad. Monitoring, all of the scientific data that my brother suggested shows that we have very, very extensive and well-detailed information about the changes in people's habits, the extent to which this affects their health, the protect standards, the development of clean indoor air laws, smoke-free laws in various countries, smoke-free campuses, hotels, and other kinds of private institutions, quit lines, counseling, pharmacotherapies to offer support. Warnings began now almost 45 years ago, which led to the current day's developments, and enforcing the bans on tobacco advertising with the US TV ban starting in 1970 to restrict youth access, particularly getting rid of the notion of Joe Camel, and raising excise taxes not just locally, but internationally and on a state basis as well. Now, this strategy clearly requires regulation. And for human rights people, government regulation is something that they generally resist. The notion being that you have certain freedoms and national regulation restricts those freedoms. And so producers and consumers will challenge regulation as violations of rights of individuals to make decisions about consumption, even though they may make those decisions and then become addicted and then lose their capacity to make independent decisions. And the claim that it affects producers' rights to produce and deliver products, engage in commercial speech, and the like. And so, what we have seen over time, and the slide that my brother showed, which is absolutely critical, is that in the 20th century, 70% of the deaths and the smoking was going on in the northern hemisphere, and 30% in the southern hemisphere, or the less developed countries, and that in the 21st century, the number of deaths will rise to 1 billion, but the ratio will shift to 70% in the developing world and 30% in the developed world. How will that happen? And the answer is by the tobacco companies shifting their supply strategies to less regulated parts of the world. This battle has been, or is being won in the northern hemisphere, but to maintain market share, the device that has been used is free trade. So have no doubt that it was US free trade policies and efforts by US officials and others to expand global health markets that promoted the expansion of these developing country markets based on the notion that our concern about health policy is national and not global. But now, as it becomes clear that our interest is in global health policy, these free trade objectives require some revision. I mean, we do not promote free trade in poisons or chemical weapons or nuclear weapons either. So you have to balance these free trade considerations on the supply side against other kinds of public interest factors. This led to this interesting notion, which is that international law has become double-edged. In other words, we use international law tools as a sword to regulate tobacco, namely the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, which Howard flagged, and also international law as a shield to defend tobacco regulation from challenge by others who are attacking it not on grounds of human rights, but on trade law and litigation, investment law and litigation, and intellectual property law. Now, many of them also in the United States have made free speech arguments, compelled speech arguments, commercial speech arguments, and the like. Now, the Tobacco Framework Convention has been signed and ratified by 180 states parties, signed by the United States, but not yet ratified. And while it's an important document, the key of it is helping countries to reduce supply and demand with two critical provisions relating to plain packaging, allowing the plain packaging and labeling of tobacco products as dangerous, and limiting tobacco advertising, promotion, and sponsorship. And here is the Australian packages again. The scientific evidence demonstrates that this packaging has had an immediate impact on public health. It reduces the appeal of tobacco products to consumers. It reduces the misleading effect of that packaging. It increases the effectiveness of warning. The most effective warning comes when it's delivered at the very point of consumption. And the strongest form of deterrence against new smokers or continued smoking is information dissemination, but at a point in which it will actually dissuade people from continuing with their addiction. This has been expanded by the European Union to a tobacco products directive, which survived early challenge before the European Court of Justice. The main goal is harmonization of domestic legislation and health protection. Here are some of the elements, which is that member states have 2 years to introduce a harmonized mandate. The question is, will this be challenged on the grounds of being discriminatory, about which I will say more. Now, the transnational legal process in action after the pioneering moves by the Australian government has been a series of forum shopping moves in international forums by Big Tobacco, principally British American Tobacco and Philip Morris International. They have spent billions of dollars, and they have bought many, many lawyers. But I told them, you cannot buy your brother's love. And this means that the question is whether the best lawyers are participating in the side of the fight that has less money. One of the most effective advocacy moments was John Oliver on HBO, his 18-minute segment from February 15, 2015 on tobacco control, which has millions of hits. You should watch it. It was put in place in part through research given to John Oliver's program by the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids. Now, there are many, many forums in which international tobacco litigation has gone on. And I recognize here in the audience Sergio Puig, who is here, who is in the process of publishing an article in the Harvard International Law Journal. The editor-in-chief is here. Congratulations for doing it. The remarkable thing is that it has taken so long for an international law journal to publish such an article. he reviews 10 different courts, international courts, in which the action has occurred. I'm going to focus on the 4 biggest areas: free trade agreements, arbitration before the ICSID, which is World Bank investor-state arbitration, bilateral investment treaties, the World Trade Organization, and then efforts in corporate social responsibility. I personally have argued 2 of these cases, a North American free trade case called Grand River and the Uruguay case against Philip Morris before the ICSID last October. Now, here is one of the exhibits put on by Philip Morris in the Uruguay case, which was also posted online. The documents are closed, but they themselves put this out there. This showed the evolution of the health warning in Uruguay before 2004 to December 2009, where you see that the police power was used by Uruguay to impose a single presentation requirement. In other words, not having different kinds of brands or different colors. They're all red. And at the same time, having 80% of the package covered by more and more graphic warning labels. And what Philip Morris did was to challenge this, the 2 requirements, the single presentation requirement and the 80% packaging requirement, as a violation of various trade rules, about which we'll say more. Under the World Trade Organization, Indonesia, Ukraine, Honduras, the Dominican Republic, and Cuba have all filed against Australia for violations of the World Trade Organization, principally relying on challenges based on the TRIPS, trade-related intellectual property rights, and the agreement on technical barriers to trade based on trademark rights and claim of unjustifiable encumbrance. What's obviously interesting here is that, as you see in the John Oliver video, many members of the Ukraine government did not even know that they had filed, that British American Tobacco is paying Ukraine's legal bills. It's also paying the Dominican Republic's legal bills, that Cuba has filed for violation of intellectual property rights, even though the Cuban government less than 50 years ago tried to abolish intellectual property as a socialist government. Now, you can debate these issues on their own terms, and most of the claims have been litigated on trade or property grounds. Claims of expropriation, claims of abuse of the police power, claims of unlawful discrimination, or claims of trade barriers. On their own terms, it seems to me these are false arguments. For example, trademark owners have a right to prevent someone from stealing their trademark, for example, using the Marlboro colors, but they have no right to prevent public health authorities from warning consumers about the dangers of the product. Under the TRIPS, you cannot unjustly encumber a trademark, but actually, to what extent is a trademark, can it be modified as necessary to protect public health? And even the Thai cigarettes ruling, which struck down a Thai ban on foreign cigarette imports as protectionists, found that labeling would be less trade restrictive, which suggests that you can label whether or not you can actually discriminate against imports on these grounds. The most important battleground is now developing countries who are being deterred even from passing these laws. As the New York Times reported, Namibia passed a law and was bombarded with threats from the tobacco industry. The tobacco industry has massively more resources than these sovereign governments. And even more developed nations like Canada and New Zealand have backed away from planned tobacco laws for fear of having to engage in lengthy and hugely expensive investor-state dispute settlement. The WHO Director General Chan has made it clear that legal actions by the tobacco companies were deliberately designed to instill fear. She said, "The wolf is no longer in sheep's clothing and its teeth are bared." Very candid language for an international bureaucrat. And even that in countries where there has been massive influence buying, Mark Levin of the University of Hawaii Law School has chronicled international courts have generally supported national tobacco control, even though the efforts to influence national regulation has led to billions of dollars being spent by the tobacco industry as lobbyists, which has led now to the new effort in the Trans-Pacific Partnership. It said it was signed last week. It was signed in February, which is when we were originally going to give this lecture. And the United States Trade Representative Mike Froman now backs a carve-out to prevent international arbitration by tobacco companies to attack these laws, which is the first subject matter specific carve-out. And this is obviously a hugely important issue. As you know, the TPP its future is very much under discussion at the moment in the election and elsewhere. Another question is whether it should be extended to other products, particularly e-cigarettes. If, in fact, we're talking about a right to be free of addiction to nicotine, then it may well be that e-nicotine delivery systems violate that human right as well. But at the same time, it's pointed out that this may lead to the nanny state. Bloomberg, as mayor, famously suggested that soft drinks and big sugary drinks be regulated, which led to him being mocked for over-regulation. Even though energy drinks led to 20,000 emergency room visits in 2011, the tobacco companies would like to ally themselves with Coca-Cola, Red Bull, and others for the purpose of engaging in further attacks on these regulations in the court of public opinion. And then finally, as Howard pointed out, the ultimate solution may well be corporate social responsibility. CVS Caremark removed tobacco products on the grounds that it's inconsistent with the healthcare mission. Walgreens and Rite Aid have not followed. A question ought to be whether students and others decide to engage in a campaign of selective support for those who go along with the CVS corporate social responsibility movement, as they've done on other issues such as fossil fuels, textiles, etc. I think this is the most important point I can make. Why human rights? Joseph Kony and the Lawyers Resistance Army are believed responsible for 100,000 plus deaths. And huge amounts of energy have been devoted to calling him a war criminal because he captures children, makes them child soldiers, and they kill children, and then he enlists more children. The tobacco industry spends $8 billion a year in the United States alone, has contributed to 5 million documented global deaths, left unchecked to 1 billion deaths a year, and we treat this as commerce. Is our system of human rights remediation in proper proportion if this is the kind of focus that we are giving to these issues? And if people are saying things like the right of commercial speech resists government regulation, can you imagine that if Ebola or Zika were communicable vectors, that governments could not cover products that might deliver those vectors 80% with warnings to prevent people from getting sick and dying from those same things? My point is this, and this is where I close. 3 points. First, it's about human rights. This is not just an issue about property rights, discrimination, trade, or the police power, but it is being litigated on those grounds rather than on the grounds which is most preeminent, which is public health as a global imperative and human rights as a global imperative. Why are we allowing these issues to be litigated as trade law issues about supply and demand, as opposed to issues about the public interest? Second, of course, human rights are on both sides of the equation, but individual human rights will turn on whether national governments have a right under international law to regulate to protect public health. And obviously, human rights arguments can be made on both sides, but You don't have a situation in which we simply sit back when a willing seller sells chemical weapons to a willing buyer. We consider that something subject to international law regulation in the public interest. And third, it's not just about human rights. Human rights aren't just on both sides of the equation. This is a moral choice for us as lawyers. I was often told at this law school about the so-called taxi cab principle, which is you consider yourself as a lawyer a taxi cab, and if someone appears, you give them a ride. At some point after I graduated from law school, I decided that if I was a taxi cab driver and Adolf Hitler showed up, I would say to him, please take another cab. I'm not saying he doesn't have a right to a lawyer. I'm just saying he doesn't have a right to me. And I have freedom too, which is the right as a lawyer not to represent someone who I think has engaged in certain practices. I'm not denying him a right to have representation from others, but I do not believe that people with money should be allowed to buy the freedom to lawfully addict and kill. So for the students in the room, I say that this is a legal battle that's just beginning. Which side will you be on? This is a global health problem and global human rights problem of the very first order. Think of a human rights issue that will kill 1 billion people in the next century unless we address it. It's bigger than guns. It's bigger than chemical weapons. It's bigger than most of the other issues, genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity, on which human rights activists spend much of their lives. We do not in those circumstances say let the producers and the consumers agree. We suggest that there is a public interest that can be regulated in the name of public health and morals. And this is exactly this issue. My brother and I have had very, very successful lives. And on this issue, I think we've decided it's time, after all these years, to start to work together to make it clear that this is a battle that should be won in our lifetimes. Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting us here.